Thanks for the introduction. As Dimitri said, I'm here today to talk about the multicore GC, and I have tried something for the first time, which is to make handwritten slides. So I hope that this works. So to start, right, OCaml has been around for a while now. I think many of us might know that. But for a very long time, OCaml did not support multicore natively, right? It was in 2022 that OCaml 5 was finally released, and it had multicore support. So this started as a 2% project at the University of Cambridge, where Casey and Stephen Dolan started hacking on the multicore garbage collector. And it took us something like 7 years to get to a point where we have it mainstream. So it was not an easy task. What I'm trying here is to try and summarize what is going on behind the scenes. I know 30 minutes is not a lot of time, so I'll just try to scratch the surface. And for those who are interested to know more about this, I would recommend reading 2 papers that were written on this topic: Retrofitting Parallelism onto OCaml and Retrofitting Concurrency onto OCaml. So the key thing here is that for multicore support to happen for OCaml, the challenging thing was to develop a garbage collector that was capable of handling concurrency. And we are going to see how. Okay, first off, operating a GC is a trade-off that you pick between space and time. Right? So let's say X is the amount of space that is the theoretical minimum you need to operate your program. And this is a ballpark figure, but 1.8x of that space is something of a sweet spot that you have. So, essentially, a GC lets you not to worry about things like memory allocation or how your program handles memory, right? So just remember that we are picking a trade-off between space and time. If you have very little space, your GC is going to run for a long time. If you have a lot of space, your GC is going to run for a lesser amount of time, but of course you would end up using a lot more memory. So there is that. Also, let's see how the values are stored in OCaml memory. Right? OCaml has this uniform memory representation. So all objects are treated the same, basically. Essentially, let's just remember that. Values can be 2 types. Values are either integers or pointers. How do we distinguish those? Integers have 1 in their least significant bit, and pointers have 0. So integers are immediate, as in they can be accessed directly. So that saves us a lot of time. Pointers are boxed values. They have some metadata attached to them. We'll see what it is soon. But just remember that we have a uniform memory layout, and values are either integers or pointers. So not too complicated, I hope. What is in a pointer? We have metadata, as I mentioned earlier, and we have the actual data. So the metadata has some things that are relevant for the GC, which are the size of the block. Because it is variable, we store the size. It has something called the color, which is a bit of which is a piece of information that the GC needs to track the state of the object. We'll see what colors are when we look at the major GC. And we also have a tag which gives us some information about what kind of an object the pointer is. There are some kinds of object that the GC doesn't scan at all. So it's the tag byte that tells us whether the GC should scan an object or not. For example, float arrays are not scanned. So if the type of object is such that it need not be scanned, the GC doesn't scan it at all. So OCaml follows what is known as generational hypothesis. The way heap works here is we have one large major heap and we have a small minor heap. So this is for a sequential program. Consider we are not at the point of multicore yet. So what are some trends here? Young block, so by young block I mean memory that is allocated in this minor heap. Young blocks tend to die young. So the blocks, the values that are allocated in the minor heap don't stay for long. Values that are allocated in the major heap do tend to stay for a longer period of time. And the objects that are alive in the minor heap are promoted to the major heap. That is, the objects that are still alive and that are present in the minor heap are copied to the major heap. There are some really nice tricks that the GC does here, but I won't be getting into details of it right now. But just remember that we have two heaps. Major heap follows mark and sweep collection, and the minor heap follows copying collection. We'll see what the relevance of it is in a bit. But before I dive in, these are the key takeaways I expect would be useful for folks writing OCaml programs. Right? Allocations are fast. A large chunk of the allocations happen in the minor heap, and minor heap allocation is fast. I will justify that in just a bit. Also remember that the pause times are small. So since the GC memory is not exhausted, we have very low pause times. There are cases where the tail latencies might be large, but again, I'm not going to get into that. Survival rate of allocated objects is low, which means, again, a lot of the objects that we allocate are collected. So how can I speed up my program? Right? I think that is what we think of as someone writing OCaml programs. Allocate as little as possible. That's, I think that is one thing I would want everyone to remember from this talk, even if you forget everything else. Allocating as little as possible is going to make your program run as fast as possible. So that is the key takeaway in my opinion. Okay, so let's dive a bit into the details, right? Minor heap. As I said earlier, we have a small minor heap. The default size is something like 2 MB, and the GC also gives us hooks to sort of adjust the size of the minor heap. So the minor heap is one single blob of memory on the hardware, right? And allocations are fast in the minor heap. Collection, so a collection is triggered when the minor heap is full, and the collection is non-incremental, meaning the entire collection happens in one single go. There's no stopping the collector, as is the case with the major heap. We'll also see that in a bit. So the objects that are still alive on the minor heap are copied to the major heap. There's a nice trick the GC does where it just links to the objects that are alive from the minor heap so that we don't end up doing a lot of work here. This is sort of the overview of the minor heap. How does allocation happen? So imagine this is our minor heap. We have a few pointers, and of course they all have a camel young prefix in the runtime, but I'm going to skip those details for the sake of simplicity. We have a starting address and the end address of the minor heap, which is the actual memory address of these. we have the current pointer, which stores the current location of where our allocation is. And we also have something called limit, which is equal to start when we start. But we have a separate value for limit because we sort of use this limit as a hook to trigger minor GC when, say, in the case of signal handling or other special circumstances. So which is why there are two different pointers for start and limit, but they are the same in most cases. So these are the values that we are using. How does the allocation actually happen? Let's say we have an empty minor heap and we want to allocate 2 blocks. So the pointer is incremented by 2 from end to the current address of the pointer. So this is the reason allocation is fast on the minor heap, right? All you're doing is you're changing the value of pointer. So there isn't anything else that we are doing here. So which is why the allocator allocates small objects on the minor heap. And of course, it allocates bigger objects directly on the major heap. So once the minor heap is full, it triggers a minor collection. So this is again for a sequential program. What happens in the collection itself? The collector starts from a set of objects called GC roots. So for the sake of simplicity, let's assume we have one GC root. What essentially happens here is there's a breadth first search that happens with the root as the starting point and to trace all the objects that are traceable from the root. We want to keep all these objects because there is a possibility they are necessary at a later point in the program. So we start from the GC root, we trace all the objects that are available from the GC root, and all of these are copied to the major heap. And an interesting detail and an important detail here is that garbage values are not touched at all in the minor heap, right? All we are doing is we are finding out the set of objects that are still alive, we are copying it to the major heap, and we are clearing out the minor heap. We have a new heap. So we don't touch the objects that are unreachable. So let's say if there are only 20% of the objects that are still alive at the end of a minor collection, we are not touching 80% of the objects. So we are doing as little work as possible for minor collection, which is why it is very fast. Right, and what happens when we have multicore? So the difference here is that we still have one shared major heap, which is large in size, but every domain has its own minor heap. So you have as many minor heaps as the number of domains. So in the example here, I have 3 domains. So we have one shared major heap, and we have 3 different minor heaps. So what do I mean by domain? For those of you who may not be familiar with parallelism in OCaml, domain is the basic unit of parallelism. It was dubbed as domain because we already have something called threads, which are system threads. System threads, to clarify, run concurrently, they don't run in parallel. So the major heap here is shared between domains. So all the domains have one single major heap, but it has its own minor heap that only controls. When you allocate something, the domain either allocates on its minor heap or for larger allocations, allocates on the major heap. Another key detail here is that a choice was made for the minor collection to be stop the world, which essentially means when minor collection happens, it doesn't happen independently. When, say, domain 1 triggers minor collection, it happens parallelly in all the domains that are there. So this choice was made not in isolation. This choice was made in comparison with another model. So this model is known as Stop the World Parallel Collection. There was another minor collector developed which was called concurrent minor collector, which lets one do the minor collection independent of what other minor heaps are at. So let's say if I want to just collect domain 1, I could do that in the concurrent collection model. But after a lot of experiments, benchmarks, and also considering the fact that the Stop the World minor collection allows us to retain the CFFI, it was decided that Stop the World minor collection is going to be the default. I mean, just remember that it stops the entire program, collects, and then resumes. Yeah, this is what I mean by that. So let's say my domain 0 is full, but there is still space left in my other domains. What happens here is domain 0 is going to send an interrupt to all the other domains saying, stop whatever you're doing and start minor collection. So minor collection happens in parallel in all of these domains. So all of these domains are going to promote their live objects to the major heap. So there are some neat tricks to make sure that they're serialized. Yeah, this static work sharing is not a major detail, but this is just to highlight that we are still not in an ideal place where the work is distributed evenly amongst the existing domains, right? It is still possible that one domain might end up doing more work than other domains, which is still okay. We, practically speaking, we haven't observed this to be a blocker for our programs. So practically this is still fine. Okay, now moving on to the major heap. So major heap is follows what is known as mark and sweep collection. Marking determines all the objects that are still alive, and sweeping clears out garbage. So let's just keep that in mind. It is non-moving, meaning we don't move the memory locations of the objects while we are doing the major collection. It is also incremental, unlike minor GC, which means it happens in small slices. So you don't really stop your OCaml program for longer durations of times. So which lets us have shorter latencies. If it were not incremental, it would stop for a long amount of time. So that would end up in a case where we have large latencies. So I think OCaml is known to have a performant garbage collector and to give really nice latency values in the sequential version, and that was also retained in the parallel version. So when we look at a major cycle, essentially this is how it looks like, right? Mutator means the OCaml program itself. It then goes on to marking the root phase. The root here is again the same. Root is a set of GC roots that are alive. It goes to the marking phase, and then it goes to the sweeping phase after marking is done. What happens in marking? So let's for now consider a sequential program in OCaml 5. Okay. So during the marking phase, all the live objects are marked and they're put into a structure known as mark stack, which has objects that have been marked but not scanned yet. So remember we saw GC color in the metadata for an object. So these are the GC colors that we follow in the OCaml 5's garbage collector. These are slightly different from what stock OCaml follows, but I'm not going to go into the details of what it is in stock OCaml. So we have 4 states for the garbage collector. An object is marked, meaning it is put into the mark stack, and it needs to be scanned for its children nodes. An object can be unmarked, meaning it has not been scanned by the GC yet, or it could also be unreachable by the unreachable from the GC roots. An object is garbage, meaning it has to be removed, and the memory can be reused for something else. And free essentially means it's a free memory location, and we can allocate there. So these are the 4 different states of the garbage collector. And this is what is tracked in the GC color field that we saw earlier. When we have a marked object, we are going to trace the objects that are reachable from the marked object. This is again a breadth first search, as we saw in the minor GC. So the objects that are reachable from a live object are also marked and put in the mark stack. So this process repeats until we have marked everything, right? So we pop an object from the mark stack, we mark all its children, so they go to the mark stack again. This process goes on until the mark stack is empty. So at the point mark stack is empty, we know that the marking phase is over, right? How much time do I have? Okay. What happens in sweeping? So sweeping again is going to incrementally scan the entire heap to sweep garbage values. So during the sweeping phase, all we are doing is we are changing the meaning of garbage to free, right? We know that a value is garbage. We are going to tell the next cycle that this space is available for use. So this is what happens during the sweeping phase. But unlike minor GC, in the major GC, if you observe, we are going to touch every single object in the major heap, which is why major heap collection is more expensive than minor heap collection. The set of objects that are affected by marking and sweeping don't have an overlap at all. So the nice thing here is we don't need any synchronization between the 2 phases. So which also means that we can have overlaps between marking and sweeping phases. This is just to show that it is possible to have overlapping marking and sweeping phases. There is, of course, a very small stop the world section at the end of a major cycle. This does some bookkeeping work, which is something that doesn't take a lot of time, essentially. So, what happens in multicore? So what happens in multicore is every domain has its own mark stack. We don't have one single mark stack. So having one single mark stack would lead us to a lot of synchronization work. So having independent mark stacks leads us to less synchronization works. So marking is idempotent, meaning you can mark an object as many times as you want, doesn't matter. So it's possible that one can have the same object in 2 different mark stacks, which is more work than ideal, but which is still fine, right? It's not incorrect. And it's going to, it also means that we do less synchronization work. So overall, it is a win situation. Sweeping is disjoint, meaning a domain sweeps only the area that it controls, right? It doesn't touch areas that are controlled by other domains. So we don't need a lot of synchronization here. This is an oversimplified visualization, I would say, but this is just to give a hint of how that happens. So the allocator has size segregated pools that are controlled by every domain, and every domain allocates only on its own pools and sweeps only its own pools, but it could mark objects that are controlled by other pools, other domains. So this is Essentially how the allocator and the collector interact in the major heap. We have another nice thing on the major heap, which is compaction. So as we can see from how the major collection works, all the garbage objects are dubbed as free once the major cycle is over. So we have free holes in between the major heap, right? Compaction phase takes all the live objects and allocates them in a contiguous fashions so that we avoid fragmentation. The OCaml GC has very nice tricks where this is done in place. So you don't allocate a new heap. You do the whole thing with O of one space, essentially. Of course, it avoids fragmentation, and not too important or maybe important detail here is that it's explicit call only on multicore for now. Meaning, if you want to compact, you have to explicitly call gc.compact for compaction to happen. This was not the case in OCaml 4 and below. This might also change in OCaml 5, but not for now. With that, I've gone through all the details, but I want to highlight the key takeaways once again. Just remember to speed up your program, allocate as little as possible, right? With that, I think I've said everything I wanted to say. I would like to thank two people, majorly Casey and Sadiq, who helped me a lot with the presentation, with reviews, and with giving me a lot of details. So I hope you took away some information from this presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Oh, yeah, we have a Q&A if you have any questions. Okay, see you. Sorry? Yes.
I guess just in based on the way that the minor heap is kind of checked checked at the same time for all domains. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that if I, like an idiom I have for concurrency, usually or parallelism is I'll throw long jobs onto other queues to work, and then the main thread can go around doing what it wants. But if it's doing a lot of allocations, does that mean it's actually slowing up my worker threads then? And so there's no benefit to, or some benefit, but it's kind of, if I've got a lot of jobs going on, I need to make sure everyone's not doing allocations. Otherwise, they're going to negatively impact the kind of long jobs.
That is true. That is true. So even if one of the domain is allocating, it's going to trigger collections, and that is going to stop all the domains. So your analysis is right.
Any more questions?
Hello, thanks for the nice talk. So I'm curious. So I did some performance characteristics between single core OCaml 4 and single core OCaml 5, mm-hmm. and somehow my memory was doubled. So my memory usage. So, and since you mentioned compaction, you have to call manually. So me as a developer, when do I know when to call compaction? So are there any incentives from the runtime, or why is the decision that I have to call it manually?
That is a good question. So to answer the second part, why a developer has to call compact by themselves, I think it is a temporary decision. It is because the GC compaction in multicore is still new. So we are not at a point where GC compaction is intertwined with the GC itself. But regarding your question about when to call compaction, I think, again, it's a matter of tuning. It's a matter of tuning the size of minor heaps. So I would recommend trying out a few different things. If you're keen, we could also ask Sadiq, who wrote the compaction. I think he might have a better idea of when is a good time to call compaction. So I'll follow up on that.
I have a different question. Thanks for your answer. So in OCaml 4, I think in 4.12 or so, there was this strategy called best fit developed and integrated and used by default. And that speed up my OCaml programs by a huge factor. So how is OCaml 5 compared to that? So does it apply best fit or does it use the next fit? So how does it find the next free space in the meta heap, I suspect?
So it doesn't use best fit. I know best fit was a huge improvement in a lot of OCaml programs, and I also think a lot of performance analysis went into making best fit the default allocator for OCaml 4. But OCaml 5 follows something called a stream flow allocator, which is it has size segregated pools that are local to every domain. There has been performance comparisons between OCaml 4 and OCaml 5, and one of the major thing for OCaml 5 to be accepted was that we should have both feature and performance parity with sequential OCaml 4. So we did not observe a lot of regressions in the OCaml 5's allocator. It is not best fit allocator that is in OCaml 4, but it is still a good enough allocator for OCaml 5, to answer your question.